Imagine a powerful company led by a CEO who never tolerates failure. Enrique Castillo lives under absolute control. Until the arrival of Isabella Almeida, a mysterious and audacious employee. But what happens when her past hides secrets that could destroy Belmont Group's reputation? As their connection grows, Isabella reveals her true mission, seeking justice for a corporate crime that destroyed her family. Enrique must decide between protecting his legacy or facing the truth she exposes. Twists, tensions, and impossible choices. How far would you go to discover the truth? And what would he do when she put everything at risk? Don't blink, because this story will captivate you from start to finish. The sound of Isabella Almeida's heels echoed across the shiny marble floor of the Belmont Group reception. The building was imposing, with its glass walls that reflected the sky like a monument to corporate ambition. It was Isabella's first day, but her expression didn't betray nervousness. She knew that this work represented more than a new beginning. It was a chance to open doors and also to seek answers. "Miss Almeida?" called a young receptionist, smiling politely. "The head of HR is waiting for you on the 10th floor." "Thanks," Isabella replied, adjusting the strap of her bag and entering the elevator. As the door closed, a man entered at the last moment. Elegant and impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, he exuded authority. With the phone pressed to his ear, his voice was firm but controlled. "I want the numbers updated by the end of the day. No excuses." He ended the call and finally noticed Isabella's presence. "First day?" he asked with a discreet smile. "Is it that obvious?" Isabella replied lightly. "Don't worry. Everyone has their first day. Good luck," he said, before the elevator stopped on the 10th floor. She went downstairs, but his gaze followed her for a few moments. As she walked through the corridors, Isabella couldn't get the meeting out of her mind. Who was that man? The answer came minutes later, when she entered a meeting room. In the center of the glass table, surrounded by directors and team leaders, was the same man from the elevator. "Good morning, everybody. I'm Enrique Castillo, CEO of Belmont Group," he said, his voice filling the room. Isabella's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. I knew it was crucial to demonstrate confidence. During the meeting, Enrique caught his attention directly. "Miss Almeida, I heard about your experience with process optimization," he began, his eyes fixed on hers. "We are always looking for improvements. I would like to hear your ideas." Isabella took a deep breath before responding. "Of course, Mr. Castillo. One of my proposals would be the digitalization of contracts. This can reduce processing time by up to 40%, she said firmly. The room was silent for a few moments before Enrique tilted his head as if evaluating every word. "Interesting and bold for your first day," he said with a slight smile. "I want a detailed report on this idea by tomorrow." "It will be done," Isabella replied, determined. After the meeting, Enrique watched her leave the room. There was something intriguing about her, a presence that seemed to challenge him in ways he hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Isabella walked down the corridor, aware that this was just the beginning. The true test was yet to come, and she would need more than courage to face what was in front of her. The next day, Enrique Castillo leafed through the reports accumulated on his desk, but his attention was elsewhere. He couldn't get Isabella Almeida out of his head. There was something different about her, a mix of confidence and mystery that intrigued him. Even without realizing it, he started looking for pretexts to watch her in action. During a meeting with the team, Enrique noticed her presence at the back of the room, taking notes. He decided to test her. "Miss Almeida?" he called, his voice resonating. All eyes turned to her. Isabella looked up surprised, but maintained her composure. "Yes, Mr. Castillo? You seem to have an opinion on the matter. Why don't you share it with the group?" he said, crossing his arms. Isabella took a deep breath before responding. She knew that moment was decisive. "Well, Mr. Castillo, I believe that the suggested approach is efficient, but it could be more aligned with the data we recently collected. We can integrate steps 2 and 3 to save time," she said, pointing to the slide on the screen. The room was silent for a few moments. Enrique kept his gaze fixed on her before smiling slightly. "It's an interesting idea. Let's explore it," he said, closing the subject. After the meeting, Enrique approached her in the hallway. "I like people who think quickly. You always seem to be prepared," he commented. "I'm just doing my job, sir," Isabella replied seriously. "And it's good. But I get the impression you like to question things," he teased with a smile. "I just like to ask what no one else wants." She replied, returning the smile before continuing on her way. Enrique stood still for a moment, reflecting on the exchange. She really intrigued him. Later that day, he found her in the company's common area, reviewing documents. He decided to get closer again. "You don't stop, do you?" he said, looking at the leaves in his hand. "Not when there's a lot to do," Isabella replied, without looking up. "And do you always work alone?" he insisted. Isabella finally looked at him. "I tend to believe that if I want something done well, it's better to do it myself," he replied calmly. Enrique laughed, shaking his head. "That's something we have in common," he said, before saying goodbye. As Enrique returned to his office, he realized that he was looking for excuses to interact with Isabella. Something in him was changing, and he didn't know exactly how to deal with it. The corridors at Belmont Group were bustling that morning, but for Isabella, the movement was just another background noise. She knew that the comments about her and Enrique were starting to spread. It wasn't something she had sought out, but she also couldn't deny that his attention affected her. In the cafeteria, 2 colleagues whispered at a nearby table while Isabella got a coffee. "Have you noticed how Enrique is always around her?" commented a woman, casting a glance in Isabella's direction. "Hard to miss, but we know how this will end, don't we?" replied the other with a contained laugh. Isabella pretended not to hear, but inside she felt the tension growing. It was there with a clear purpose, and any distraction could ruin everything. Later, while working at his desk, he received an unexpected message. Enrique asking them to meet on the executive floor. When she arrived, he greeted her with a cordial smile. "Are you adapting well?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit. "Yes, Mr. Castillo," she replied, trying to maintain professionalism. "Excellent, but tell me something." He paused, folding his hands on the table. "You seem like someone with an interesting past. Who is Isabella Almeida outside of Belmont?" The question took her by surprise, but she controlled her expression. "Just someone who works hard, like everyone here," he replied, with a restrained smile. Enrique watched her for a moment, as if trying to read beyond the words. "I understand," he said, without pressing her further. "Keep it up." Upon leaving the office, Isabella felt the weight of that interaction. He knew that Enrique was beginning to suspect that there was something more to his presence in the company. That night, at a Belmont event, rumors about the two reached a new level. Enrique talked to other executives, but his eyes often looked for Isabella in the room. This did not go unnoticed. "Have you seen how he looks at her?" whispered one of the guests. When Isabella realized that the attention was on her, she decided to walk away. Enrique found her on the terrace, with her back to him, observing the city. "It looks like you skipped the party," he said, approaching. "Sometimes silence is more welcoming," she replied, without turning around. "I hope the rumors aren't bothering you," he commented with a genuine tone. Isabella finally looked at him. "They don't bother me, but they are distracting," she said directly. Enrique smiled as if appreciating the sincerity. "Maybe I should stop giving reasons for these rumors," he suggested, but his expression said otherwise. Isabella shook her head, giving a slight smile before returning to the room. Enrique remained behind, more confused than ever. Enrique was in his office, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view of the city. The Belmont Group was the image of its discipline and control. But lately, something was slipping out of its hands. The intriguing presence of Isabella Almeida. He knew there was something more behind her determined stance and sharp comments. Suspicion began to grow since he noticed how she avoided personal questions. A conversation with Carlos, a long-time and trusted employee, only increased her discomfort. "Carlos, do you know anything about Isabella's life before working here?" Enrique asked casually while they were reviewing a report. Carlos hesitated before answering. "Not much, Mr. Castillo. But I heard that her father, Ricardo Almeida, worked for one of Belmont's subsidiaries. He was fired a few years ago under complicated circumstances." Carlos adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know the details, but I remember hearing that he tried to report something he thought was wrong." Enrique felt a pang of guilt. It was not uncommon for minor problems in subsidiaries not to reach top management. But if it were true, that wasn't just a minor problem. It was something that could tarnish his company and his conscience. He knew he needed to hear the truth directly from Isabella. At the end of the day, he asked her to come to his office. "Mr. Castillo?" Isabella asked upon entering, her expression neutral. Enrique stood up from his chair, crossing his arms. There was tension in the air. "Isabella, I need you to tell me something. About your father," he said directly. For an instant her face hardened. She knew this moment would come, but she didn't expect it so soon. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice calm but full of caution. "I want to know what really happened." "His name is Ricardo Almeida, right? Did you work for Belmont?" Enrique pressed. Isabella took a deep breath before responding. He decided it was time to expose the truth. "My father, Ricardo Almeida, dedicated 15 years to Belmont. He was loyal, diligent, always did the job right. But when he discovered unethical practices at one of the subsidiaries, he tried to report them. What did he get in return? He was fired and humiliated. It destroyed our family," she said, her voice starting to crack. "I saw my father lose everything, dignity, respect, even health." Enrique remained silent, absorbing her words. Guilt hit him like a wave. He had never heard of Ricardo Almeida, but that didn't lessen the impact of what she said. "And what did you come here for?" "Revenge," he asked cautiously. "No," Isabella replied firmly. "I came here to find justice. To understand how a company that prides itself on its reputation could have allowed something like this." Enrique took a deep breath, leaning on the edge of the table. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked, his tone lower. "Because I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know if you were different, if he was the type of leader who cares, or just another one who closes his eyes to what is happening around him." Isabella replied, looking at him. The silence between them was palpable. Enrique felt torn between protecting his company's reputation and facing the mistakes that, even though they were not directly his, fell on him. "I need time to process this," he said finally. "Just don't take too long. The truth doesn't wait," Isabella replied before leaving Enrique alone with his thoughts. Later, as he stared at the city lights, Enrique knew he couldn't ignore what she said. The control he had always cherished seemed to be slipping through his fingers, but deep down he already knew what decision he needed to make. The next morning, Enrique woke up with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. There was no more room for doubt. If the Belmont Group had really harmed Ricardo Almeida, he needed to make amends, not just for Isabella, but for the integrity he always defended as a leader. He knew this decision would have consequences, but it was a risk he was willing to take. At the beginning of the working day, he called an extraordinary meeting with the board. When everyone was gathered in the meeting room, Enrique began. "Gentlemen, we have a problem that needs to be addressed immediately." His voice was firm, but his eyes showed seriousness. "I recently discovered that one of our former employees, Ricardo Almeida, was unfairly fired after trying to report unethical practices at one of our subsidiaries." The room fell into silence. The directors exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Enrique, these situations are delicate. Often there are factors that we don't know about," one of the directors began, but Enrique interrupted him. "Factors or excuses?" he replied, looking directly at the man. "We are talking about a person who dedicated years to Belmont and who was betrayed by our inability to act correctly. This is non-negotiable." Another director tried to intervene. "But exposing this could harm our image, not to mention the financial risks." Enrique slammed his hand on the table, cutting off any attempt at resistance. "Our image is worthless if it is built on lies." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words fill the silence. "Let's investigate the case in depth, and if Ricardo Almeida was truly harmed, we will take measures to correct this. The truth will come out, with or without your cooperation." After the meeting, Enrique found Isabella in the hallway. She looked apprehensive but determined. "You spoke to them, didn't you?" she asked, her gaze searching for some answer on his face. "I spoke, and we're going to investigate your father's case," Enrique replied, with a conviction that surprised her. "I will make sure he gets the justice he deserves." "This won't be easy," Isabella said, her voice low. "Nothing worthwhile is easy," he replied. "But I won't hide behind excuses or fear. No more." The following days were marked by intense meetings, confrontations with resistant members of the board, and a joint effort to uncover the details of Ricardo Almeida's case. Finally, the results arrived. The subsidiary had manipulated information to cover up failures, and Ricardo was used as a scapegoat. Enrique called a press conference, where he admitted Belmont Group's mistakes and announced a compensation fund for workers harmed in similar situations. Isabella watched the broadcast from home, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration. That night, Enrique went to her. They were on the terrace of their apartment, looking at the city lights. "I did my part, Isabella, but I need to know, what about us?" he asked, turning to face her. Isabella smiled slightly, but there was seriousness in her expression. "You proved that you are different, Enrique. Who may be the leader I was hoping to find? But this isn't just about us. It's about continuing to fight for what's right." Enrique nodded, understanding what she meant. "Then let's do this together, not just for Belmont, but for the future we want to build." "Together," Isabella repeated, shaking his hand. As the city glowed in the background, Enrique and Isabella knew they were just getting started. The justice they sought was not the end, but the beginning of something greater, a future based on truth, courage, and equality.